Hello students, I hope you are doing well. I will be giving your video lecture this week on the passive tense and irregular verbs. So by the end of the lesson, you'll be able to understand the difference between passive voice and active voice. So what are those? You'll be able to identify 4 different forms of the passive tense from video clips from Harry Potter, so hopefully you'll enjoy those. You'll be able to form these 4 different forms of the passive voice, and also identify several irregular verb forms. So irregular verbs you might have already studied before, but there's a lot of irregular verbs, and I'm going to teach you guys some strategies for memorizing them that will hopefully be helpful for you. So first, let's start with a quick review of exclamations with so and such, which we learned last week. So such, so many, and so much, remember, are used to intensify or make stronger adjectives, adverbs, and nouns. So is used for adjectives and adverbs. So example is so loud or so quickly. Such is used to make an adjective with singular or plural nouns stronger. So example is such quiet children, right? So many is used to show you have a lot of countable nouns, right? So we have many like 1, 2, 3, umbrellas, monkeys, doors, things you can count, right? So much is used to show you have a lot of an uncountable nouns, such as hope, courage, love. We can't count, we can't have multiple hopes or multiple courages, right? But we use so much because we only have like one of that, right? Phrases with that, so we can use so and such to show, in phrases with that to show results. So an example is, I was so tired that I fell asleep before 8 o'clock. We also use so and such with comparative adjectives. So for better, for example, she did so much better than her brother in school, right? So we use so much with a comparative adjective to show, to facilitate the comparison. There were so many more students than teachers, right? So more, again, is a comparative adjective. We use so many with that to do the comparison. All right, so let's start out with get into the video lecture for this week, which is focused on the passive tense. So the passive tense, or voice, there's a difference between the passive and the active tense. So active tense is when a subject does an action to something, an object, a person, a place. So example is, he drives the car to the store, right? We have the subject and he does an action to something else. He drives what? He drives the car to the store. Here the car is the object or the complement, right? A passive voice is when an action is done to something. So we take the same topic or sentence and we can just make it passive. So an example is, the car is driven by him, right? So here we see the difference is what was the complement or the object becomes the subject of the sentence, right? The car is driven by him. So why do we use the passive voice? We use the passive voice to make the person or thing that experiences an action, such as the car, the subject of a sentence. So here we see the car becomes the subject of the sentence, right? And we use this if we want to just put more attention or focus on whatever the object or person is that's experiencing the action, right? So not actually all forms, but most forms of the passive tense include the past participle or verb 3. So all forms of the passive tense include the past participle or verb 3. You guys know what verb 3 is. So regular verbs are predictable and easier to remember. So regular verbs, the past participle is just the base form of the verb plus ed. Some examples of that are walk, which is walked in verb 3. Love, loved, prefer, preferred. So I walked to the store, I had walked to the store. I love you, I had loved you, right? Some irregular verbs do not follow that pattern. So their past participle is not the base form plus ed. Some examples are, so for am, is, or are, to be, the past participle is been. I am sad, I had been sad in the past. Keep, kept, send, or sent. I send my homework to the professor, I had sent it at 3 p.m., right? And so later in this video lecture, I'll be teaching you guys about some irregular verbs and also some strategies for remembering those. So let's first look at the present passive. So this is one form of the passive voice, and we're going to look at this video clip.
Can't let you out, Hedwig. I'm not allowed to use magic outside of school. I can't let you out, Hedwig. I'm not allowed to use magic outside of school.
Okay, so with the present passive, we see that Harry says, I'm not allowed to use magic outside of school. So here we notice, with the present passive, the positive is we have the subject plus am, is, or are, plus the past participle, right? So in the negative form, we see there's subject plus am, is, or are, plus not, plus the past participle. So let's stick with our example from Harry Potter. There's a change of subject. So in the active form, it would be Hogwarts doesn't allow Harry to use magic outside school, right? And when we change that to the passive, we show the effects of that rule or that prohibition on Harry. So here we see Harry isn't allowed to use magic outside of school. Or if he's talking, then he says, I'm not allowed to use magic outside of school, right? So here we see that the object or the complement of the active voice becomes the subject in the passive form. Harry is not allowed to use magic outside school. So we use the present passive to show an action that happens regularly, a habit, or also just like a state of something. So Harry isn't allowed. He's not allowed to do it for right now, the current times. Some more examples are the car is washed every week. It's a habit. The report is written every Friday afternoon, right? Another form is the passive past. So the passive past we'll be learning with this video clip.
What exactly happened to him?
He was sent to Azkaban.
What exactly happened to him?
He was sent to Azkaban.
Diggory was murdered by Lord Voldemort. Cedric Diggory was murdered by Lord Voldemort.
So with the passive past, we see that Albus Dumbledore, he says, he was sent to Azkaban. Cedric Diggory was murdered by Lord Voldemort. So here with the form, we have the subject plus was or were, which is the past simple of to be, plus the past participle. We also see the negative form, which is the subject plus was or were plus not, plus the past participle. So let's look at the change of subject. So in the active form, it would be, let's take the first sentence, they sent him to Azkaban, right? They is the subject, they sent him to Azkaban. In the passive form, we know that this, the complement or object, is going to become the subject in the passive sentence, right? So he was sent to Azkaban, right? We see was, and then the past participle is sent, right? So the usages, we use the passive past. It's the same rule as when we use the past simple, right? It's for an action that happened and completed in the past. So notice that for all forms of the passive tense, or the passive voice, it's the same tense as in the active voice. So they sent him, that's in the past simple. He was sent to Azkaban, that's also the past simple. So notice that when we change from the active voice to the passive voice, we do not change the tense, right? The tense stays the same, it's the past, the present, it's the present, it's the future, it's the future. It's just we change from an active voice to a passive voice. So please note that. That's really important to know. Some more examples are, I was not selected as the winner of the competition. They were hated for all the bad they did to the community. Okay. Another example, passive form is the present perfect.
Hogwarts has been chosen to host a legendary event. Hogwarts has been chosen to host a legendary event.
So here we see Albus Dumbledore again. He says, Hogwarts has been chosen to host a legendary event. So with this form, we have the subject plus has or have been plus the past participle. And then in the negative form, it's the same thing. We just put not between has, have, and been, right? So let's look at the change of subject here. The active voice would be, the committee has chosen Hogwarts to host the Triwizard Tournament. Again, the object becomes the subject in the passive voice. Hogwarts has been chosen to host the event, right? So we use the present perfect to describe an action that started or completed in the past, but that has relevance or importance in the present. So some examples are, they have been married for 30 years. They married in the past, but they're still married now. It's still important now. She has not been hired by the NGO, right? So notice that it's something that still has relevance or importance. Hogwarts has been chosen. They've been chosen, and now they're going to host, right? So it's relevant for the future, right? And so now we have the future passive, which is the last form.
Give me Harry Potter, and you will be rewarded. You will have 1 hour. Give me Harry Potter, and you will be rewarded. You will have 1 hour.
So here we see he who must not be named, Lord Voldemort, says, give me Harry Potter and you will be rewarded. So form, subject plus will be plus the past participle. Negative is will not be plus the past participle. So the active form would be, I will reward you if you give me Harry Potter. The passive voice will be, as we can predict, you will be rewarded when you give me Harry Potter. And notice here that the subject in the active voice disappears, and we don't always need to say it in the passive voice. So it's not like we say here, you will be rewarded when you give me Harry Potter by me, Lord Voldemort. We don't always have to say that, right? So a lot of times we can just get rid of the subject in the active voice, and when we're in the passive voice, right? So you will be rewarded when you give me Harry Potter. We don't have to say by who, right? So we use the future passive like future simple, an action that will happen to something or someone in the future, right? Some examples are, she will be done with her exams at the end of next week. The rice will not be sold with pepper and salt. Okay, so now that you've learned some of the forms, how to form the passive and different forms of the passive, you do need to also study irregular verbs, because you have to know what the past participles are of verbs in order to form the passive voice. So irregular verbs, to remind you, are verbs that do not change the base form plus ed in the past tenses. So this is in your book, in the end of the book. So please, look at these. These are some examples of irregular verbs with their past simple forms, which is verb 2, and past participle, which is verb 3. So not going to go over all of these with you right now, but I want to give you some tips for remembering or memorizing and studying irregular past participles and irregular verbs so that they come more easily to you. So one strategy is to memorize these 10 very common irregular verbs first. So I won't read them to you, but say, said, and said, go, went, gone, come, came, come. These are all very common irregular verbs that you'll read about, that you'll hear, and if you can memorize these 10, it will be a lot easier for you when trying to form the passive voice and just studying English. Another strategy is to group common irregular verbs together. So, for example, there are some verbs that stay the same in the present, so verb 1, the past simple, verb 2, and the past participle, verb 3. So, for example, cost, it's cost, 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 set, 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 cut, cut, cut. So if you remember those, it can be easier. You can group them according to verbs that stay the same in both verb 2 and verb 3, but not the present, verb 1. So for example, breed, I breed, but I bred, they had bread. Shoot, shot, shot, pay, paid, paid, get, got. So if you remember those verbs, it can be easier. And then also verbs that end in en in the past participle. So for example, speak, spoken, wake, woken, eat, eaten. So you can group irregular verbs together by what they have in common. Some other tips and tools are to learn the verbs in full sentences. That can be much easier to remember them if you remember them in a sentence. So for example, I see the bee, I saw the snow, but I've never seen a bee in the snow. You can also learn by songs. This is a wonderful cat video that I won't show you right now because there's not much time, but please check out this video. I'll send the link to your Telegram chat. It's a great song, and if you learn by songs, it can be a great way to remember the past participles and irregular verbs. Write down lists of verbs in groups and leave the lists out so you can see them frequently, like in your house, on your phone, anywhere. If you see them more, then you'll probably remember them more. And then you can also use the loci method, which is a memorization technique that I taught you for vocab. This also works for verb forms. So think about like a house or something and think about the different rooms. and try to associate the different verb forms with different rooms. So you can say, for example, the cat sings in the shower, sang in the kitchen, and has sung in the living room. So think about different areas, and you think like, oh, the living room is where has sung, you remember, right? So that's it for this week. I hope that you enjoyed the clips and learning about passive voice and some irregular past participles. Let me know if you have any questions. Please write them down, and please stay healthy and safe. We miss you all very much, and talk soon. All right, bye.